welcome to our career panel discussion with the Northwestern CIERA REU program. We run this every year and it's always a pleasure. This is probably the biggest group that we've had, so I'm very excited to have everyone with us. The reason why we run this career panel discussion is mainly to give the REU students and other undergraduate students a chance to talk with real professionals who have gone through and gotten their physics or astronomy PhDs and now are in a wide range of career paths. And for the students to just get a bit of an idea of what that journey was like and what they can do to make themselves successful. And part of the motivation is, at least on the astronomy side, many people who go into astronomy PhDs, the overwhelming majority of them finish their PhDs. About 3/4 of those go on to a postdoc, and only about half remain in academia about 5 years after getting the PhD. Everyone else goes to federal agencies, observatories, national labs, for-profit, not-for-profit companies, government, data science jobs. And so there's a wide range of different career paths that we go to, but when we're in school, sometimes all that we're hearing about is the job of the faculty member that is advising us. And so those are great jobs, and of course, so are all the other jobs, and we want to allow our students to learn how to get there. So I'm taking some of this from a survey that was done by the AIP, which I'll actually post a link to that on YouTube when I post the video, has a lot of great statistics. The good news is that really, regardless of the employment that the students eventually go into, more than half say they do research at their job. So, for you students out there, if you like research, you don't have to go into academia. You don't have to be faculty. That's not your only way to do research. Also, regardless of having a postdoc, the overwhelming majority say that the PhD gave them appropriate background for their job. So, of course, we're having a career panel like this so we can all learn about all the exciting jobs that are out there. And with that being said, let me hand it over to our panelists. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. We're going to go in alphabetical order. Hopefully you all panelists can make that alphabetical order work. And all I really want is just a few minutes for you to just tell us who you are, kind of your path through school. If you want to impart any wisdom onto us at this point, that's great too. Then after that, we'll open up for questions. So let me open up to our panelists to introduce themselves.
So I'm unsure if we're doing alphabetical order by first name or last name.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let's try. You can go ahead.
I'm happy to start, I guess. So I'm Chandra Prescott Weinstein. I am an assistant professor of physics and astronomy, and also core faculty in women's and gender studies at the University of New Hampshire in Durham, New Hampshire. And I am a theoretical particle physicist and cosmologist by training. And I say by training, not because that's not what I do, that's actually exactly what I do for my research, but I also have a secondary expertise now in feminist science, technology, and society studies. And that's not something, I've never taken a class on women's studies. I've never taken a class on feminist theory. So I would say that that's one thing that maybe makes me a little bit unusual compared to the other panelists. And I guess just to give a super quick CV, because I think that's what we were asked for. I was an undergraduate at Harvard. I started a PhD in astronomy at UC Santa Cruz, and then realized that I was enjoying my quantum field theory classes more than I was enjoying my stellar astrophysics classes. And I'm transferred to a PhD program in physics at the University of Waterloo and Perimeter Institute in Canada. So being an academic for me also turned me into an immigrant, and I was an immigrant in Canada for 4 years before I returned to the United States for a postdoctoral fellowship at NASA. I then did a postdoctoral fellowship at MIT. I then did a research associate position at the University of Washington before coming to the University of New Hampshire. And I just started in January, so I am definitely basically brand new to all of this faculty stuff. Did I cover? I think I covered everything.
You did great. Yeah, thank you. So going in order of first name, Dave, you're next.
Hi, folks. My name is Dave Spiegel. I guess I'll go mostly chronologically. I studied mostly exoplanets when I was in graduate school, got my PhD at Columbia. I think I was actually the first person at Columbia to get a PhD in exoplanets. Moved on from there and did a postdoctoral fellowship at Princeton. That lasted 3 years, and then I did another postdoctoral fellowship across town at the Institute for Advanced Study. And so I guess I was one of that 50% of people who was still in the field 5 years later. But after 6 years, so 2 3-year postdocs, basically in my 6th year of postdocing, I decided that was going to be my last year of postdocing. And if I landed a tenure track faculty position that year, that would be great. And if I didn't, I would try to find some other career path. And I didn't. And so I tried to find a way into data science. I spent a month applying for a whole lot of jobs, learned a lot during that month of application, ended up landing an offer at a startup in New York where we were making a wrist-worn wearable device. The company was called Project Florida. The device we were making was kind of like a Fitbit. And I learned a tremendous amount during my year at Project Florida. I was building models that ran on the device, so like activity recognition, heart rate determination, stuff that was very different from what I had done, although there was an interesting connection in that I had done radiative transfer in exoplanet atmospheres in Astro, and then I was doing radiative transfer in people's wrists in order to measure heart rate. At the end of a year, the company ran out of money and went out of business, and that was very educational too. And I learned all kinds of things about business that you don't learn in astronomy or in a business that's still in business. And I had to find another job, and I landed a position at Stitch Fix, where I've been for the last 4 years. Been working on a variety of roles at Stitch Fix. I was managing a team for a while. I've been very interested also in trying to expand the professional networks of people who might not have as much access to professional networks as I had when I was going through my postdocs. So it was very useful to me to have friends who were in data science, and I've tried to kind of pay that forward in various ways. So excited to be part of this panel, and happy to hear from you folks if you'd like to reach out.
Thanks, Dave. Hershel, I think you're next. I think you may be muted.
All right, I'm unmuted now. I'm Hershel Gupta. I'm a program officer at the National Science Foundation. And I took a somewhat unusual path into astronomy. My background is in chemistry, and I later on became an astronomer. So my field is the study of molecules in space. So I look at very unusual and often highly reactive molecules that are present in the interstellar gas. And I do that with radio astronomy. And in a related effort, I also study some of these molecules in the lab. So I go back to my old lab at Harvard to do that. And so I am in a supporting role at NSF. I help evaluate proposals, funding proposals that come to us from universities, but I'm also an active scientist. Currently, my responsibilities include managing the postdoctoral fellowship program here at NSF and in the Division of Astronomy, and also my other primary responsibility is overseeing the Green Bank Observatory from the NSF side. So those are my two main job duties. I also help with our grants program to support what's called laboratory astrophysics, so things that people study in the lab that are of fundamental interest to astronomers. basically anything that can help in the interpretation of astronomical data falls within the purview of laboratory astrophysics. So these studies can be studies of atoms and molecules in the lab and plasmas, as well as theoretical studies that can inform our understanding of space. So that's my background. I got my degree at the University of Texas in Austin in chemistry, and then later on I continued there, got my PhD in physical chemistry, and at the same time I was a fellow at the School of Engineering at Harvard, and there I interfaced with the astronomy department at Harvard, and that's sort of my second home now. So I've continued down this path. It's taken a somewhat unusual path, but I am happy to be an astronomer, and I'm happy to talk with all of you and listen to your questions. Also, Chanda mentioned she was an immigrant. Her path took her into Canada. I am an immigrant. I hail from India. I just became a citizen a couple of years ago, So, kind of a scattered background there, but I'm sure people will have questions, and I'll be happy to answer those.
Great, thank you very much.
And by the way, Aaron was a fellow in our astronomy postdoctoral fellowship program, so I have that connection with Aaron.
That's right. That's how we know each other, and that was, by the way, for those of you who are students planning ahead, the NSF has a graduate fellowship. They also have a postdoctoral fellowship, both of which are excellent. I would strongly encourage you to apply when you're eligible for both of those. Jessica, I think you're next.
Great. Hi, my name is Jessica Kirkpatrick. I started by doing a physics undergrad degree at Occidental College, which is a liberal arts college in Los Angeles. And my research area was particle physics, looking for dark matter. I then did a master's in the UK, again in particle physics, and then came to Berkeley to do my PhD. And my PhD was in observational cosmology, working with data from the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. As I was finishing up my PhD, I knew I didn't want to be like a research academic, but I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do next. And so I applied to a wide range of jobs and ended up getting a job as a data scientist at a social networking company called Yammer. And I've been working in the tech industry ever since. That was 2012. Working on various products. So I've been at Microsoft, I've been at Chegg, I've been at Hired, Slack. I am currently at a company that is using data to try to find new mineral deposits. So it is a geological problem and also a data problem. It's a fun job because it gets to combine some of my data skills with my physics background. I've also done quite a bit of volunteer work for the American Astronomical Society. I just recently finished my appointment on the Board of Trustees. And so I can also talk about ways to get involved with nonprofit organizations and societies in order to help make your communities better. And I've written for a few blogs and online journal things on issues around inclusion in STEM. So that's another area that I'm happy to talk about.
Great, thank you. Kim, I believe you are next.
Hi, I'm Kim Coble. I'm a professor at San Francisco State. And my journey really began even before college. I grew up in Columbia, Maryland, which had a lot of access to great public schools and diverse community and lots of museums and special programs. I got my first job in this field because I had to get my wisdom teeth out when I was 16, and I went to the doctor, and the doctor knew me. He's like, "You like astrophysics, right?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "A friend of mine needs a research assistant at Space Telescope, which is in Baltimore, Maryland." And so that's how I got my first job in this field. And I loved it. I continued on majoring in physics and astronomy at the University of Pennsylvania. And then I did my PhD at the University of Chicago. I did observational cosmology. For those of you who work on cosmic microwave background stuff, that's what I was working on during my grad program and during my first postdoc at UC Santa Barbara. Then for my second postdoc, shout out to the NSF AAPF program. It was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. That fellowship, you do part research and part education work. And so I did my research back at University of Chicago and education work at the Adler Planetarium, where I continued to volunteer for many years afterward. And I got so excited about the education work. I knew I wanted to be at a teaching-focused institution. So, I had many people, there was so much pressure in an R1 to be at an R1 school that going to a more teaching-focused place was considered an alternative career, even though we do all the same things, just in different proportions. So I took a job at Chicago State University, where I was a professor for 12 years, and did a combination of teaching and research work with the awesome students there. And then partway through the first couple of years, I got so excited about the education work and less excited about the astronomy science work that I started switching to astronomy education research. So I did that by working with folks who were already astronomy education researchers as collaborators. And, started off with work in improving physics classes for diverse learners and creating cosmology learning modules and doing research on students' ideas about cosmology so that we knew where students were coming from rather than just making stuff up. When the previous governor of Illinois decided to shut down higher education, I started looking for other jobs, which is a really painful choice. But now I'm at San Francisco State University. I've been here for 3 years, and I love it. I still miss Chicago. You can see my neighborhood's poster in the background here. And I also have served in various committees for AAS and for AAPT, the American Association of Physics Teachers. Right now, I'm the chair of the Education Committee for AAS. So I could also speak to how to get involved in service work. Basically, the best way to get on a committee is to just be on one committee, and then they ask you to be on all the other committees. Okay, thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Kim.
Yeah.
Next up is Ryan.
Hey, great to be here and great to hear all these amazing trajectories that you've brought together from people all over the field. So I did my undergraduate in physics in Boulder, and there I was had the chance to work on solar UV studies, but I really was I had sort of found my interest in astronomy there and was more interested in studying things that were further afield, nothing that had to do with the Earth, but things were further away. So I went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison for a degree in astronomy, which is where I met Aaron. We were there for approximately the same time frame. I guess you were there, you left a little bit earlier than I did, but I think at some point we actually sat at desks that were like right facing each other, like mere feet from each other for quite a period of time. So I know Aaron. And from there, so I studied local large-scale structure and some galaxy evolution type of stuff on the observational side of things, actually going out to telescopes and taking images, taking spectra, that sort of thing. And went to do a postdoc in Taiwan at the Institute for Astrophysics over there. I got that opportunity basically because of a connection to a collaborator, but I took it as an opportunity to go live somewhere else, somewhere quite different for a period of time, because I wasn't sure I'd either have or jump at that opportunity in the future. So that was a great chance to work over there, and both have Asia at my fingertips to go to conferences or to just go on travel, but as well as to just meet a different group of people and different group of researchers over there. After a few years there, I was furiously applying for other postdocs and faculty jobs, and I think it was one day when I was reading a blog post about how to get a faculty job and all the things that could go wrong along the way, and how to go instead get a job in data science. It may have even been one of your blog posts, Jessica, because I think that you were into the world of tech a few years ahead of me. And I just thought, wow, this is kind of absurd. Like, there's this one thing over here that's like so hard and so improbable, and I have to like be willing to move anywhere in the world. And then there's this other thing where it's like there's this amazing demand for people in this field where you can kind of go solve any problem you want to solve. So that was kind of a turning point for me, and I started focusing more in the direction of moving into tech. And so I studied databases and machine learning and all the things that seemed like things that I could learn pretty quickly but didn't have at my fingertips as an astronomer. And then went and applied for jobs and ultimately got some offers for data science, but along the way discovered some jobs that were more around curriculum development for online education. And that ultimately felt like a better fit for me. So I landed at Udacity, where I got to build courses and be an instructor, but also learn an immense amount, because I was really teaching in areas that I wasn't an expert in, like autonomous systems, like robotics and self-driving cars and that sort of thing. And so we got to work with experts in the field, so it didn't feel like I was a total fraud being on working on these courses, but like the exposure to experts in the industry, as well as the opportunity to teach tens of thousands of students around the world, really worked for me as like this kind of career that I didn't know existed before, and suddenly felt like such a great fit. And so I was at Udacity for about a little less than 3 years. Actually got a chance to work with Jessica as well there as one of our advisors to the AI and data science curriculum areas, as well as an instructor. So that was very cool to get some data science perspectives on curriculum from Jessica. And I've recently moved to another company called Pathstream, which is much smaller, very early stage, but we are building online curriculum similar to what Udacity does, with technical digital skills as a focus, but for community college students, well, primarily, and we're also expanding into four-year institutions. So this is a little bit different from Udacity in the sense that it's not a consumer product. It's more of something that's intended to be credit-bearing, part of a degree or part of some larger certification that allows you to get the skills you need to get a job. So that's been cool. One thing that sort of snuck up on me recently was my colleagues from Taiwan reached out and said, hey, we're working on this paper on galaxy mergers with some of the new manga data from SDSS, and this is based off of a catalog that you generated back when for galaxy mergers and such, selected from UKIDS and SDSS stuff. Do you want to be on the paper? And I was like, whoa, that's so generous of you. I've been out of the field for 5 years now, but sure, send it to me. I'll give it a review. And I felt kind of excited to be back in the loop on science and give them some feedback on just like how to write. Like I feel like I've learned a lot about how to write good technical content over the time I've been away. And that paper just got published, or just got accepted to AppJ, I think, this morning. So I was like, wow, this actually ties in with some things I've been thinking about like bringing the technical world that I've been exposed to more into contact with the scientists that I know, because I feel like if I knew from the inside that there are all these people on the outside like starving to get involved in science, and the fact that they bring technical skills that, frankly, a lot of scientists just don't have. I mean, we never had the time to get trained as programmers, for example. We never had the time to get trained as proper statisticians or, these other things, proper computer scientists. So that's something I'm really interested in right now, and I'm looking to forge more connections between the world of basically technical skills coming from everywhere else and academic science.
Thanks, Ryan. That's actually a great kind of thing to lead into our questions, because that's actually one of the reasons why we're doing this panel, right? Is to forge these type of connections and let you all be resources for these students. So great. Let me be sure that I thank all of our panel members. Thank you so much for being here. You're really making this possible. We're going to transition to questions from students. For everybody, I'd like us to do, if you're asking a question, say your name first and where you are right now, and then ask your question. We're going to start with our students here. Hopefully one of us has a question. I've noticed that we don't have many questions in the chat window, so for those of you who have questions in mind and are joining us on Blue Jeans, please enter questions into the chat window so I know to call on you. Otherwise, we will be asking questions here. I also have a list of questions to fill the time if needed. So, who wants to ask the first question? I have to speak.
Hi, I'm Camille. I'm at Northwestern and my question is for all of you that went into tech or data or something different and you're not really doing research anymore, at least primarily. So there are thousands and thousands of places where you can get data jobs or tech jobs. So what did your job search look like? How did you narrow down which jobs were tailored to your experience and your skill set? And how did you find those connections?
This is Jessica. I can go first. It was not for me, for most of the jobs that I've gotten, I've known someone who's worked at the company, and there's been some direct connection within my network or a friend of a friend. That's been true even as I've become more established in tech and have the skill sets, but especially when was initially trying to transition, it helped to have someone on the inside to vouch for me. And I found that the most important things when people are transitioning initially are to find environments where you can get help leveling up and learning the skills that you need to grow as a technologist or a data scientist or whatever new job you're trying to do. So teams that have resources to train you and to mentor you. There are people who join jobs straight from academia or from physics or astronomy where they're the only person doing it and they figure it out. But I think that it's a lot easier if you have a group of people that are more senior that can help you with that. So I think that's my perspective on that question, but I'd love to hear other people's.
Yeah, I can jump in now. This is Dave Spiegel. I agree with everything Jessica said. My own path when I was leaving academia was it was much more difficult and very different from when I was leaving that first job that I had after academia. So leaving academia, I didn't know what I needed to do in order to make myself a good candidate for data science or other jobs. Like, I knew the only thing I knew was that I wasn't going to be an astronomy postdoc anymore. And I wanted to have a paycheck. I didn't think I wanted that paycheck to be in finance, but I really wanted to have a paycheck. And so I applied for a really wide range of jobs, including finance jobs, and I reached out to people I knew. One of the pieces of advice that I got from someone was one of the pieces of advice that I got from a lot of people was use your network. And one of the ways that I was feeling was, I don't think I have a network. And so another piece of advice was, you do have a network, even if you don't know it. Just talk to anyone. You never know where connections are going to come from. And so something that was very helpful to me, certainly having people on the inside of companies is helpful. Like having someone who can vouch for you gives your resume much more visibility than if you just apply to an open rec that's listed on some website. Recruiters can be helpful. So I work with a professional recruiter, and that connection came from talking with a friend of mine from elementary school. And he had a kid who was in a daycare program with the kid of someone who worked as a tech recruiter. And so there were so many steps to that, but that recruiter then ended up connecting me with a number of hiring managers, one of whom ended up being the one at Project Florida who ended up offering me the job. I completely agree with Jessica that when you are lucky enough to have, or not use the word lucky, but when you are in the position to have multiple job opportunities, prioritize a few things. Prioritize jobs that will help you gain the skills and experience that you want to have for the future in your career. Something that people sometimes prioritize, and I can't say that you shouldn't prioritize this, but is compensation. But my own feeling is that if you have the freedom to not prioritize compensation right off the bat, it's probably going to be better in the long run to prioritize gaining skills and experience. And that can lead to things that you want in the future, whether it's a role that you want, whether it's the compensation that you want. And also, of course, prioritize finding a company that has the kind of culture that you want to be in, whatever that culture is. And that's the thing that I struggled with a little bit leaving. I didn't even know what kinds of questions should I be asking to learn about the culture of the company. I cared a lot about inclusion, diversity, things like that. And so I tried to ask questions around that. And what I found was that you hear a lot of answers that are from people trying to sound like they're saying, everyone wants to say the right thing. But I found that some people sounded like they thought more about the issue than other people, and that mattered to me. That felt like it was going to indicate the kind of culture that I wanted to have. I also got a different feeling when walking into different places. Some places felt like very corporate, and it just didn't feel like it meshed with me. And others felt like a bunch of ex-academic people just like me. And so, there's a real sense of comfort that I got in some places that I didn't get in others, and I sort of followed my nose. And the really comforting thing was that, so I happened to be happy at that first job. That job ended without my choice when we went out of business. When I searched for a job the second time, I had so many more opportunities. I had a lot of companies contacting me, which hadn't happened the first time. And the first time I had only a few offers. The second time I had many more offers. And I actually, if I had to do over again, I would be more selective with where I looked, because you don't need to line up offers on your mantelpiece. You need to find the right role that fits. But the reason I'm mentioning this is that once you get your foot in the door in tech, if you weren't at the place that feels the best, having gotten some experience, it will be much easier to find another place that might feel better in the event that you feel like you made the wrong choice initially. I'll wrap up there.
I can make a few comments. I think those are just fantastic answers, so I don't think I need to take a whole lot more of our time because there's other questions coming in. Reading Jessica's blog is a good idea, as she mentioned, and as she posted in the Slack there. So go ahead and check that out if you want to move into data science. Tons of great information there. I guess the only thing I would add to what others have said is keep an eye out for roles that you didn't imagine for yourself. Like when I discovered building curriculum for online courses, that was something I had never considered. In fact, I passed right over those jobs in job boards multiple times before even opening one to look at what it was, and ultimately discovered something that was a better fit for me. So I think that one of the big discoveries for me in being in tech is that I could take a whole number of roles at a company that I never knew were something I could do before. And now I realize that a certain amount of technical expertise, as well as a certain amount of personal skills and program managerial skills, you can kind of do anything at a company. You've just got to decide what you want to do. So keep an open mind.
Great. Okay, let's move to a question from Cole at MIT related to undergraduate research or undergraduate coursework and how that links with what you do later on. Cole, I'll let you ask the question if you're there.
Oh my gosh, turn the video on.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay. So yeah, I was just wondering what the panelists thought about how their undergraduate research, the field in which they worked in or did coursework in, applied or was necessary to comply to the work which they did as a graduate student or as a postgrad.
So I'm happy to take this as someone who is all over the place as an undergraduate and then graduate student. So I do particle cosmology, and so my research mostly focuses on dark matter and also on the period immediately after inflation, which we call reheating. So this is broadly early universe cosmology. And for undergraduates, particularly at an institution like the one I was at Harvard, to get involved in doing that kind of theoretical research, you typically have to be the top student in the class. And to even get the theorists to pay attention to you and to be seen as being smart enough to do it. There are all sorts of problems with hierarchy and how we think in physics and astronomy about what research is hard and what research isn't. And I think that's partly because theoretical physicists, for the most part, unlike me, have never actually gone observing with astronomers. I've actually gone observing with astronomers, and it's really hard. It's not just, observing isn't the only thing that's hard, but I think that there's really an underappreciation. So when I was an undergraduate, I was totally not that student that people were like, you have to work with me. Like people weren't like begging me to come work with them. So I wrote my junior thesis on extrasolar planets. I wrote on looking for missing sodium in extrasolar planetary atmospheres. I wrote my senior thesis on winds and active galactic nuclei. So those things seem pretty different from what I do now. And in fact, like in a lot of superficial ways, they are, except that it's recently become clear to me that active galactic nuclei, AGNs, can actually be useful for doing dark matter searches. And so I'm finding that as I get further along in my career, I'm actually returning to some of the things that I did as an undergraduate. And I was, in fact, recently at a meeting with my senior thesis advisor, where he was kind of like, what are you doing here? And I said, well, I'm thinking about dark matter and active galactic nuclei now. So that's, I think, one comment is that I actually really encourage students to be broad, partly because things like that happen with your research. I also spent a summer doing building lasers for Bose-Einstein condensate slow light experiments, so condensed matter research. And probably what I'm best known for in the scientific community at this point is my research on Bose-Einstein condensate dark matter. So that wasn't something that I planned out, but that's something that happened. And, just thinking about my extrasolar planets research, I am going to be teaching stellar astrophysics in the fall, and I'm finding that pretty much everything that I did research-wise as an undergraduate is serving me super well as an instructor now. So I just, I know that you can kind of get the feeling, especially I think the pressure is much more extensive now than when I was an undergraduate, that we didn't have to have publications in order to get into the top graduate programs. And I know a lot of the top graduate programs are demanding students have publications. I just want to say University of New Hampshire doesn't have that kind of admission standard. So I just want to put that out there for UNH's PhD program. But I don't think that you have to publish in the thing that you will end up doing. I think that it's important to have broad experience and actually find out what you like doing, because reading a popular science book, like I read Brief History of Time, and reading Carl Sagan's Cosmos, they've both been important motivators for me, but they don't at all actually give you a sense of what the practice of actually doing the science is like. And you may find that what you enjoy doing is different from what people like to sell books about. So I think that that's a really important thing to find out, that you may actually not like doing calculus all day. You might want to get your hands dirty with data, in which case you shouldn't be a particle theorist, because all you will do is calculus all day, basically. So I think that those are really important things to think about. And the one comment I would make for the people in the room who might be thinking, I want to do particle physics or cosmology theory in graduate school, that some programs do want to see that students have taken either quantum field theory or general relativity as undergraduates. I think that this is an extremely problematic admission standard that is becoming increasingly common. But I do think it's important to also put out there that that is something that is happening. So if you feel that you could take and be successful, like, B plus in one of those classes as an undergraduate, and you have the option to take them, that's something to think about. But again, there are pathways that don't involve that. And so I don't want anyone to be discouraged either.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, go ahead, Kim.
Thanks. Yeah, I was just going to echo Chanda's thoughts on going broad being super useful. I'll give the caveat that I started as an undergraduate 30 years ago, and I'm very, very sad to see what I consider to be like an arms race in what you need to do as an undergraduate. I had the chance as an undergraduate, out of sheer luck, early in grad school, to try out a couple of different things. It was just sort of expected that you would try a couple of different things and just sort of marinate in the lab. And then you would really get into your graduate work, and I'm very sad to see the pressure on students. And having done those broad things, I also brought them into my research in ways that was extremely productive. With my advisor, and combining fields like doing some theory, doing some observation, and then winding up in data analysis. And so, I too would echo all the things Chanda said about broad being good, and coming back when you don't even necessarily know where it's going to go.
And so I'll piggyback off of Chanda and Kim and say that having that breadth, for basically being driven by your curiosity about science in general, you can tailor your coursework to take classes that you're interested in. So even though I was a chemistry major, I took classes in junior and senior level classes in physics and mathematics, and I followed my interests. As a sophomore, I did research on how proteins attach to inorganic materials, and that was a hot topic back then. But I found out that I was much more interested in spectroscopy, in studying the structure of atoms and molecules. And that led me to find out that there were very unusual molecules in space that one could use to infer the conditions in interstellar clouds and even star formation regions. And so I followed my curiosity and then converged on a path that I felt would utilize all of my skills that I learned as an undergraduate and into graduate school. So it's very important to keep an open mind and be broad. Think of it as a buffet that you're getting as an undergraduate. You're getting some broad exposure to the general sciences, and then you can hone in on what you want to do in graduate school and beyond.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll move on to another question from our Northwestern students. Anybody?
Hi, so I'm Andrew. I'm at the Northwestern REU. Question, this is just for anybody to answer. It's kind of a two-part question. So what made you choose to either leave or stay in academia, either going into grad school, coming out of grad school? And was there ever a point in your career where you doubted your choice, felt like you may have made the wrong decision? And if so, what did you do about that and about those kind of feelings of self-doubt?
I have a funny story about this. When I was deciding to switch from astronomy science to astronomy education research, I knew in my heart I was so interested in those kinds of questions in that field, and it was just burning inside me in the way that science wasn't. And yet there was so much pressure to not do that. I ended up convincing myself I was doing the right thing by eating a whole bag of fortune cookies until I got the answer I wanted.
I can offer a little bit of my own experience there. Like I said in the little intro, I was really like trying desperately to figure out how to land the right faculty job in the place that I wanted to be, and I was really willing to go a lot of different places. I was applying in Asia, I was applying in the U.S., I was looking at what my opportunities might be in Europe or South America, and really it just became like, for me, a certain sense of instability in both the application prospects that I had and also the idea that if you even if you land a job in a place, if that doesn't work out, you can't just like go down the street and get a different job in that same sort of genre. It's like you might need to pick up and do the whole thing over again. And I felt like some sense of like wanting to look in directions of more stability, but also looking for just other new opportunities is what drove me to look for things outside of academia. And when I was making those decisions, I talked to a lot of people who had made the switch into data science primarily, but some people who were doing other things, and talked to them about how it felt. And really, I was looking for some of that sense of like, do you regret it? Do you feel like you wouldn't have done this had you made a different choice in the past, or given the choice again? And I ran into no one who said that, and now I'm 4 years out from leaving, and for me it's been a great adventure and a learning experience, and I certainly feel like I've made the right choice. So I feel like you've got to weigh your options and really think about what you're interested in doing, but then ultimately don't be afraid to make a choice to do something really different from what you initially set out to do.
Go ahead, Jessica.
I guess my perspective is it just seems like it's less and less common for there to be these linear career trajectories that go in, the direction that maybe was more common 20 years ago, or what our parents or our professors did. And so I would just suggest to be like curious and open to different opportunities as they present themselves to you, and seek out things that seem like they would be fun and make you happy. I think the hardest part about transitioning out of like an academic faculty path for most people that I took to is not that they have a worse time day to day, or they regret it because they like don't find their job interesting or fun. It's more the shift of like, I had this vision of my identity as being an astronomer, being a physicist, and that I was gonna be a researcher for life, and now I'm doing something different. And they may like the thing that they're doing different a lot better, but it just doesn't fit this identity that they had with what their life would look like. And so I think more and more this is going to be the case. And so I just would encourage you to be open to different ideas and trust your instincts about what feels good and what feels exciting and what feels intriguing to you, even if that looks different than what you anticipated you might end up doing.
I strongly agree with that, Jessica. And in my own path, um, I accumulated a very broad background in the physical sciences and astronomy, and so when I went looking for faculty positions, there was often the dilemma that who are you? Are you a chemist? Are you an astronomer? Are how do you identify yourself? So you know, so that but that broad background uh, is coming in very handy as an NSF program officer because now I can help evaluate things in a wide range of areas within the broad uh, astronomy research. So I feel like having a very broad background prepared me for my current job, and I hadn't anticipated that I would end up being an NSF program officer. It was an opportunity that presented itself, and I felt like I could really do this job, and it took some growing into it, but now I get to see research not only in my own little field, but throughout astronomy, and that's very rewarding. So it's very important to keep an open mind about possible careers. I still, and I am happy to say that I haven't completely left academia. I am very connected with it just from this other side, and I also do my own research. So it doesn't always have to be all or nothing. You can tailor things to how you'd like them to look. And it's going to be more and more important to be creative about a career. So, anyway.
I was just going to add that one of the things that was on my mind during my 6 years of postdocing was so I loved my time in astronomy and astrophysics. I met some amazing people, brilliant people, really enjoyed everything I did. And I worried that life outside academia would be less stimulating, less intellectually stimulating. I just wouldn't meet as interesting people. And that anxiety, I think, kept me in academic astrophysics for maybe longer than I otherwise would have stayed, given my estimation, which ended up being correct, about the probability that I would land the tenure track faculty position that I was applying for year after year. And I was concerned that when I left academia that I was going to really miss academic astrophysics. And I've been very pleasantly surprised that I basically haven't missed it at all, which is not in any way an indictment of my time in astro. It's just that, like, of all the interesting things that people have ever thought about, like, such a tiny fraction of them are astrophysics. Like, astrophysics is wonderful, but there's just a lot of other really interesting stuff out there. And I've been fortunate enough to find a couple of roles that have allowed me to think about some other interesting things and be surrounded by other intellectually curious people who have backgrounds that are different from mine. I'm at Stitch Fix now, where there are 110 data scientists, most of whom have PhDs in fields ranging from psychology, sociology, statistics, physics, chemistry, right? So it's such a broad range of disciplines, and I'm learning from my colleagues every day. So I guess with the hindsight that I have now, I wish I could kind of comfort myself from like a decade ago that, yeah, your time in astro was great, but you can find a lot of other things really fulfilling as well.
Right. Okay, let's move on to a question from Carrie from Cornell, who wants to know a little bit about volunteering. Carrie, I want to let you ask that question, but then I want to make this a multi-part question, combining from another person, which I'll just ask after you're finished. So, Carrie, go ahead and ask your question if you're there. Carrie from Cornell? Well, let me ask the question myself. Carrie was wondering if you all can share some information related to your experiences volunteering at places like the American Astronomical Society, and any of the outreach opportunities that you currently have or have experienced in the past that want to talk about. And then the other part of the question was from NAU, who was hoping that someone could express what the value is for joining a field-specific society, for instance, like the American Astronomical Society or APS or any of the other societies that may be out there.
Okay, I'm happy to jump in, particularly about part two. So something, I guess because I was trying to keep my bio short, I didn't mention any of kind of like my volunteer or outreach work. So I actually basically just last month retired from being chair of the Cosmology and Gravitation Committee for the National Society of Black Physicists for 12 years at least. I actually kind of lost track because when I first started, I didn't actually have a CV, so I didn't keep track of when I started things. And I would say that in terms of important professional opportunities, for me personally, my involvement with the National Society of Black Physicists has probably been the most important professional society work that I have done. I was also a founding member of the American Astronomical Society Committee on Sexual Minority and Gender Minorities in Astronomy. I actually think I came up with that name, so if you hate it, blame me. And I am now currently on the American Physical Society Committee on Ethics, the brand new Committee on Ethics. I seem to like to join like newish committees, and the American Physical Society Executive Committee, which is an elected position on the Forum in History of Physics. And I guess I will say that each person is going to have a different experience with each individual professional society. I've also been involved in SACNAS, the Society for the Advancement of Chicanos and Native Americans in the Sciences. And I have found for me the minority serving professional societies were more important spaces than the broad professional societies. I have personally found that the American Physical Society way of doing business works better for me than the American Astronomical Society way of doing business. And that's not something that you can really know ahead of time. It's something where you get to know people, you get to know who, who the executive director is and what their style is and how that impacts the operation of the professional society. And everybody just has different experiences. I will say as someone, when I was more junior, I was a postdoc for 8 years, by the way. For when I was just getting started, the professional societies, particularly the American Physical Society, was an important conference for me to attend just so I could get to know what the field looked like. As I became a more senior postdoc, that was less important for me, and I tended to attend specialty conferences more, and I haven't been to an APS meeting to talk about physics in a few years, although I did attend to give a history and science society talk this year. So also your relationship to your professional society can shift. As I moved into doing science, technology, society studies, and history of physics, I actually found that the people who were actively involved in the attending committees at APS were some of my most important cheerleaders and supporters, which was not the case for me on the science side. And so you'll find that each of the communities in these professional societies, even the smaller communities, will have their own cultures. And so I say it's important to get to know the professional societies and try them out and see what actually works in terms of the support that you need.
Anybody else want to comment on this?
This is Jessica. In terms of what the value is of being involved in society or being a member of society, I think we've talked about networking and connections, and so being a volunteer or going to meetings is a way to meet people from other institutions that are in other specialty areas or other parts of the field. It's also a way to connect with like-minded people around things that you care about. Shonda talked about a bunch of minority serving committees that she's worked on. I'm currently chairing a committee that's trying to bring folks or train academic people and provide guidance to in terms of curriculum for so that students are prepared for fields out or jobs outside of astronomy for AAS, because that's something I'm passionate about. So it's just a really great opportunity to connect with a wider range of people. Societies provide things like meetings and journals. There's also resources for best practices. There's studies, like the APS does big statistical studies. AAS just purchased Sky and Telescope magazine, so is running that as well as many other publications. So those are the type of services that societies provide, and being a member helps make that happen. But I think it can be challenging to understand the value of a society as we're becoming a more and more connected world through technology. I don't necessarily need to go to a meeting to talk to colleagues from other parts of the country. I don't necessarily need to publish in a journal to get my ideas out there. So I think one thing that we need to think about as the younger generation is how can we get societies to react to the reality of the fact that information is not as easy to get now, and what value could a society provide you that would make you want to pay that membership or go to that meeting. And so I think we need younger folks to bring in that perspective and help push the society to the next phase. And I don't know exactly what that will look like.
So I'd like to chime in as well. At AAS, for example, there are these undergraduate and graduate student fairs where universities and departments advertise their programs. It's a good way to get a feel for what these programs are by actually talking to faculty and students from there. So they're all in one big hall, and you're free to go mingle and talk with them. And also you get, just being around people, seeing all the neat stuff they're doing. I think it's immensely valuable. There's no substitute for personal interaction, even in the day and age of Facebook Live and instant connections over the internet. I think it really gives you a deeper feel for what things are by actually talking to people in person. So for that alone, I would say that the AAS is a great venue, or other societies like it.
I want to jump back a little bit to questions from the other RU programs, because we didn't actually get someone to ask. And also, Chanda, you were talking about SOCNUS and NSBP, and we have a question from Dennis from Cornell. If you're there, Dennis, do you want to ask your question about preparing for grad school?
Right. Oh, hello.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Denise.
Oh, apologies.
So I am a first-generation American college student, female, Hispanic in physics. So I know that I have to find programs that have committees and different things that provide inclusion. But what can I do for myself mentally before actually joining a program, because I know it's going to be probably really tough to join one. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So I should probably be the person to lead with answering this question. Although I think Kim actually didn't say this in her opening remarks, that Chicago State is a historically majority Black serving institution and is formerly a minority serving institution. So I think that Kim may also have a different perspective on this as someone who spent many years teaching students, primarily Black students who went on to graduate programs. So I just kind of want to poke Kim publicly. So actually, something that stood out in your question, Denise, is looking for places that have committees. And I would say that, and this maybe is going to be an unpopular comment, but I think that sometimes departments that have diversity committees can be hit or miss, because the motivation for why the committee has been formed, and there can be a lot of different politics going on behind the scenes. And so I want to encourage students, as you are able to, and I know that this can be a financial challenge. So I grew up in a single parent household, low income household. And that was basically, my mom was just saying to me the other day, we were not working class, we were poor. And sometimes you can't travel to go visit a graduate program, but as you are able to, I think that that's the single most important thing that you can do when you are actually admitted to programs, is actually go and get a feel for it, and actually get a feel for what do you think of the people who are on the diversity committee, because if those people make you feel like they just kind of want to use you, and there will be people like that, then you need to trust your gut. And I actually think that trusting your gut, as just a general rule, is one of the most important things that you can do for yourself, both as you're applying to graduate programs and once you're in a graduate program. Now, depending on what kind of program you're coming from, I find that students who come from minority serving institutions and have maybe gone to majority minority high schools sometimes have difficulty transitioning into graduate programs because it's their first time in a majority white non-minority environment. And I think that that can be a really challenging experience. I went to a federally mandated busing magnet school, and so my high school was very integrated, and then I was in an undergraduate program where I was actually, if you look at the statistics, I'm pretty sure I was the only African-American woman to graduate with a bachelor's in astronomy in 2003. So not just on my campus, but nationally, I was kind of singular and isolated. So some of how you prepare yourself is going to depend on what kinds of environments that you're used to. If you are used to being one of the only ones in the room, just know that that doesn't get better as you go into graduate school. Don't have any illusions about that. It also doesn't get better as you go become a postdoc or a professor. Actually, the numbers get worse as you go higher up if you decide to stay on the academic track and you're able to. I think that having a really strong network of people around you who maybe don't understand anything that you're saying. Like, I say stars to my friends and they're like, oh, things that twinkle in the sky. I told them I published a piece today about where helium comes from, and my friends are like, that's cool. I'm not sure I understood anything that you said. But those are also the people that I can call crying and say, you know what, I had this like microaggression today and it just got to me. You need to be able to have those conversations with people. I do think that as you're looking at graduate programs, looking at the number of underrepresented minority students in the program and figuring out what is livable for you, and that's going to be different for each person, is important. Talking to students who are in the program and asking them about their lives and figuring out, are they living lives that I want to live with? So a lot of what you're doing is not necessarily fortifying yourself, but figuring out what are the best possible conditions for me to do my best possible thinking. Because as a graduate student, your job is to think, and you want to create the conditions and find the conditions where you can really optimize having that best environment. I also highly recommend getting involved in minority serving communities that are on your campus. A lot of schools have a SOCNIS chapter. SOCNIS has been really welcoming to students of color generally, and not just Latinx and Hispanic students and Chicanic students. If there is like a minority serving office, like a diversity office on your campus, going and introducing yourself and saying, what are the resources available to me? Often the faculty in your department are not going to know, or they're going to send you to the one Black professor that they know who may already be overwhelmed with too many mentees. So I know I've said a lot. I think the last comment I will make actually is that when you do find a professor who's also from an underrepresented minority background or some other marginalized or minoritized background, it's important to understand that we actually get called on a lot to do a lot of service. My inbox is basically a collection of horror stories from around the country, because I am a writer whose name is out there a lot. People email me with all kinds of problems. Students on my campus come to me with problems. I've only been at my campus for one semester, and I already have a collection of mentees who are actually being supervised by other professors that I actually have a meeting with one tomorrow. And so it's important to be respectful of their time. And also, if someone says no to you, almost certainly it's not personal. And it's really because they think that they're not in a position to do well by you because their card is already full. And so that's a really important thing, I think, too, is to be conscious of when you're taking things personally. And I'm not talking about experiences with racism, trust your gut on that. But when faculty are saying no to you, they can be saying no for a lot of reasons. And often if they're saying no, that's the best answer for you. You don't want someone saying yes when they really can't commit. Before, one other thing I'll add is that I've written a series called Surviving and Thriving as an Underrepresented Minority Student in Physics, which I know is really long, but I think just surviving and thriving. So I've actually written a bunch of stuff about kind of getting through undergrad and applying to graduate school. And you may find that some of that stuff will be helpful to you as a graduate student too.
So I just want to echo all the things that Chanda said, and her blog is super amazing, so you should definitely check it out. And I guess I would add, again, that networking piece is super important. And different people in your network are going to give you different things. Like, your advisor is definitely not going to give you everything you want or need. And so you want to figure out, what you need and who you can get it from. There's often that one person at an institution who can help you navigate the bureaucracy, who's not necessarily the person whose job it is to do that. Again, networking at SACNAS or NSBP, or just finding your group, and again, trusting your gut. The things you're experiencing are definitely real. When you go to places, definitely ask lots of questions, especially if the grad students, to find out, what it's really like. Yeah, I guess those are the main points that I've seen. And start early, right? Start going to these conferences and building your network connections now, and getting used to different environments. And again, depending, like Chanda said, depending on your background, that's going to be that's going to look different. But network. Even if you're shy, we're all afraid of each other. So just try to marinate in that space.
and that can't be understated. One really good piece of advice I got when I was a student was anytime you go to a conference, make a list of at least 5 people that you want to go talk to, and seek them out and introduce yourself and tell them about yourself and try to learn about them. That's a good way to connect with people. And you'll find that most people are very receptive. So don't be afraid to put yourself out there.
Yeah, I just would say one additional thing is that my experience has been that the culture and environment of a place has been more important to how successful I am at that place and how valuable it is to me over like the prestige of that place. And I went to a very prestigious graduate program, and it was a very horrific experience for me. And it ended up, I think, being a detriment compared to if I had gone to a better place culturally where I had more support. And so don't necessarily take the job or the grad program that has the highest rating or the best name recognition. Think about, is it going to be a place where you thrive and where you are set up for success as you leave?
Thank you. Let me try to open up for one more question from the Northwestern people. There's another one.
I'm Nick. I'm at Northwestern. Do you have any tips as when you're applying for school and when you're going to get accepted, hopefully, how you can determine the culture, who you suggest talking to? I know this is sort of we've discussed a bit before. If there's any specific suggestions or techniques.
Aaron, could you repeat that question? I couldn't hear him very well.
Sure. Yeah. So Nick was asking, for instance, on a visit to a grad school or in general, what do you recommend as like the best strategies to try to determine what the culture is like at the grad school?
So definitely go on the visitation weekends. I don't know if graduate schools do visitation days these days. Back when I was applying, people flew me to the programs, and I was able to talk to the students there. So one good way to get a feel for the culture is to see what your peers would be like. You know, students that are a year or two ahead of you will just talk to them and ask them specific questions about the department. You know, what you might encounter, what's the environment like, are they happy doing research there, are they getting good advising, and when you ask people those questions, most of them are frank with you. That's what I found, and that I think that's a good way to get a sense. So I strongly encourage people to do that when they go on visitations.
Else want to jump in here?
I'll just toss in one question I like to add or ask is, if you could change something about the institution, what would you change and why?
That's a question you would ask anyone that you're, grad students or, for instance, during a visit.
Sure. And visit to a grad school, I also, when I've been on the job market, interviewing at companies, that's a question that I like to ask people that I meet at the companies. I think it's just a generally good question to, on visits, places will often be trying to put their best foot forward. And I like to try to ask some questions that help uncover, like, what might be behind the best foot that's forward there.
So we're nearing in on our 4 o'clock deadline. It's 4 o'clock Central Time, that is. So we may need to leave it here. There are a lot of questions still in the chat window. I'm going to try to figure out a way that we can connect everybody, maybe through Slack. I'll talk with our panelists later on to see if there's a way we can easily connect so that some of you can get your questions answered. I know many of you need to go. If you want to stick around for a little while, we can. But let me take a moment to thank everybody, especially the panelists, but thank you also to the REU programs and the many other people that are joining us. I think this was a great discussion. Obviously, there's a lot more that we can discuss. So let me break here, and if anyone needs to leave, especially our panelists, please feel free to go. If you want to stick around for another few minutes, there's at least one more question that I would love for the data science folks to answer. But let's take a break to let people leave if they need to, and then in just a minute, I just want to see if we can get in one more question.
I've got to run to another meeting, but thank you so much for organizing this, and I'm happy to be in touch with everyone. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Kim.
I have to take off as well. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Dave.
I can stay on for one more data science question, so I'll stay.
Hey, Aaron, are we allowed to ask a question of the cohorts?
Absolutely.
Well, I'll reserve that for later after they've asked their questions. But
absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's see. Laura from UWRF, are you still there? She had a question about how to market her skills, academic skills.
Yeah, hi. I guess I'm thinking about taking a few years off grad school, and when I look at jobs, a lot of them engineering or computer science, and I feel like I have the skill set, but they look for engineers and computers. I was just wondering how you best market your skills from academic research to employers. You don't necessarily have the technical training that engineers and computer scientists do.
Yeah, so a few things to keep in mind. Most job descriptions are like the dream wish list of every skill that they could possibly want, and most candidates do not have the majority of those skills. So it's not your job to reject yourself. It's the company's job to reject you. So put yourself out there and don't not apply for something that you are excited about just because you don't hit all the check marks. Second, the biggest thing that I see that people who are transitioning to tech from a different background do is they submit CVs instead of resumes, and they use a lot of jargon that the person who is reviewing the resume doesn't understand. One thing I didn't realize until I was on the hiring side is that often the person who is looking at your resume is not a technical person. They're a recruiter, and they're just looking for some key words that they've been told to look for, and they maybe are spending 10 to 20 seconds looking at your resume. So having those keywords highlighted, easy to find, and figuring out what those are really important in getting through that initial screening process. And those keywords are usually skills that have been put in the job description. So any way that you can frame your previous experience by using the same words that are in the job description is really helpful. Sometimes it's not even a person who's doing this, it's an algorithm that's reading these resumes and looking for these words, so you literally need the same words in order to get passed through. And this again is where a network is really important. I had the experience after being a data scientist for several years of applying for a job at Wikipedia. I submitted my resume through their web site where they had job descriptions. I didn't hear from anyone for 2 weeks. I then added a recruiter from Wikipedia on LinkedIn. She accepted my request, and then I messaged her saying, hey, I submitted a resume, not sure if you saw it. Within a day, I had an interview. They just didn't really look at that portal very, very carefully. So just the act of having someone who I didn't even know, but who could physically put my resume in the right hands made all the difference. So, leverage your networks at your institutions. There's career centers, there's alumni networks where you can get connected with people who are from your institution and who have gone to these companies. Go to meetups, even trying to randomly add people on LinkedIn and see if they can get your resume in the right hand can be better than just submitting through a website. Anyway, that's the advice I would give.
And if you don't for some reason get the job, you should ask for feedback on what you could do. Or is that something that flies, Jessica? Are people responsive to that?
It depends. There are some liability issues around giving feedback, and so a lot of companies won't do that, even if the feedback would be helpful for the candidate. But you can always ask. But if they say we can't give that, then it's probably because their legal team doesn't want to set them up for a potential discrimination problem.
I know in academia that people are often happy to tell you why. So I was wondering if that was true for.
Ryan, if you're still here, I wonder if you want to comment at all on this.
Well, a lot of the things that Jessica said are right on the mark. I think I'll I'll say that I have a friend right now who is transitioning from being a postdoc and a staff scientist to looking for jobs in software engineering and or data science. And I gave him a lot of advice, and he hasn't paid attention to much of it. And so I really feel like there's something that that he's holding on to that's like, you know, I'm good enough that you should want me at your company. And I mean, I think a lot of candidates don't come in with that. A lot of candidates come in very, very humble and very much like, I just want to find an opportunity. But if you ever sit around feeling like, you know, people should be lucky, I think, you know, feel lucky to have me, then like definitely get away from that mentality and just ask everybody you know, like, how can I do what I need to do to get my foot in the door? And so that's kind of what I did. And one of the biggest things that I tried to do, and that we told our students at Udacity, and that I tell anyone who's trying to, you know, get their foot in the door, is to build projects that attempt to emulate what you think that company might be doing, or things that they would find interesting and also very relevant to what they're doing. So when you say, for example, I have X amount of publications, it doesn't mean anything to people in the tech world. They sort of don't know why that would be of importance. They think it's, yeah, it's cool if you have some publications, but it doesn't really apply to the job. And so if instead you say, like, I built this app that does, you know, machine learning classification of whatever, and like you can, you know, check it out on my website, or like check it out on my profile, or, you know, I did this cool simulation that demonstrates whatever, or I'm, you know, if you've done something that's a demonstration of your skills, that's way better than being able to, or that's way better than telling somebody you have a certain skill. You're able to say, here's how I demonstrate this, and then it's also a good interview talking point, because when somebody asks you to talk about a certain aspect of your skill set, you can just kind of show and tell. So build projects, I would say, and that can demonstrate that you know what you're talking about, or that you can be helpful.
Thank you. Shonda, I noticed that you said that you would be happy to answer a question that came in from, oh, now I have to scroll back up. Give me a second. That came in from Alex from the Maria Mitchell Observatory. Are you still there, Alex? Wondering about how Chanda got involved in interdepartmental work. And Chanda, is it okay if you stick around to answer that?
Sure.
Alex, are you there?
Can you hear us now?
Yes.
Yes.
Cool. Okay. Hi. I'm Alex at the Maria Mitchell Association, he, him pronouns. And this is for Shonda specifically, since it has to do with the interdepartmental work. I was just curious how you got involved in interdepartmental work, like how you got a faculty position in 2 different departments, and then what that experience has been like since getting those 2 positions.
Yeah, so I like the framing of your question, partly because it triggers for me a lot of different thoughts about the things that we faculty are typically really bad about telling students at any level, undergraduate, graduate, or even not just students, which is how universities actually work. I've been thinking about that a lot actually over the course of this panel, partly because, like, you know, one of the pieces of advice I almost wanted to give about sort of thinking about graduate programs is to ask how many works at the university. But I think to explain why I think that matters requires bringing in some other things. But one aspect of that is, for example, what is the nature of my appointment? So my appointment is 100% tenure track in the Department of Physics and Astronomy. And I have core faculty status in Women's and Gender Studies, which means that I am allowed to attend faculty meetings for Women's and Gender Studies. I am allowed to offer courses from that program. And I'm allowed to ask them to make a contribution to my tenure dossier when I go up for tenure, but they don't actually get a vote on my tenure, and physics gets to make the entire decision. And so one of the reasons that it's worth mentioning this and talking a little bit about the structure is that this can be kind of fraught. One, I think besides Karen Barad, who's at UC Santa Cruz, I may be the second or one of the first 5 people to have some kind of physics and gender studies appointment in the United States. And so this is very not well understood territory for academics. The physics department is going to have to find some way to evaluate my contributions to social science and women's and gender studies. And as many of you may have already figured out, a lot of physicists actually don't know that much about the social sciences or about the humanities in an academic way. They may be poetry fans, but they're not necessarily reading academic literature about poetry, for example. And so I just want to say that this is, I've taken a risk, and it is untested in the sense that my tenure clock actually doesn't even start till August. So we won't know for 6 years really how this all turns out. So in some sense, I'm experimenting on myself, and my department and I are experimenting together. And my institution and I are experimenting together. That said, my department was actually really enthusiastic about hiring me. And so I also want to put, and I was open with them about wanting to have a relationship with women's and gender studies. So to go to your question of how I got involved, so this actually basically started with me counting how many Black women are in the room with me in my physics classes and noticing that there were never any, that I was more likely to see like German students than I was to see Black women from the Caribbean or from other parts of North America in my classes, even though there are probably more Black women than German immigrants in either Canada or the United States. And I picked that actually because we had a lot of German students at my PhD program, so that's why I raised that as a specific example. And so because of me spent numbers, having to engage in conversations with people about why the numbers of Black women and white women in physics and astronomy are actually different, and why the Black women and white women actually have different experiences. That I had to become kind of an amateur expert on what the literature was. And so I spent a lot of time doing reading statistics. I got to know NSF's WebCastBar database really, really well. You would be surprised at how many scientists don't even know WebCastBar exists. But that's why I can tell you how many Black women got bachelor's degrees in astronomy in 2003, because I got to know the data that well. As I proceeded along, I got more interested in trying to understand what were the ways in which feminist theory could inform our understanding of what the gender and race dynamics in physics are. And eventually, I started writing and giving talks about it, and I was encouraged to apply for a grant from the FQXI Foundation. And I applied for a grant to basically start a research group that would think about intersectionality and how intersectionality affects the practice of physics. And I won the grant. And I would say that winning that grant was a major turning point because it got a lot of people's attention. Like, people in women's studies were just like, how did you get $100,000 to do women's studies? Nobody gets $100,000 to do women's studies. And I guess the comment I will make about that is that coming into the situation, I've had a very specific privilege as a scientist that people tend to listen to what I say because I'm a scientist, and scientists in the academy tend to be better respected than humanists in the academy, especially at the administrative level. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we tend to bring in more money for institutions. And so I am very conscious of how I use the power that comes with that to make sure that I am uplifting people in the humanities and social sciences and the significance of that work to doing science. So I hope that gives some sense of kind of how I ended up in this direction. But a lot of it was my curiosity. And I'm a natural counter, and it turns out that doesn't just stay with like wanting to outline for everyone exactly the gruesome details of the standard model of particle physics. But I also wanted to know, why do the rooms that I find myself in look the way that they do?
Thank you. Hershel, I think you had one, you wanted to ask a question of the REUs, of the students. This can be maybe the last thing we do. Do you still want to ask that question? Well, you may be muted.
Yes, and Chanda's last comment is a perfect segue into this question. And this is more for people to think about rather than me having an answer right now. I was just wondering that how your REU experience is is shaping your thinking about your possible career in science or outside of science. And curiosity plays a large part, and this is in this program. You're supposed to be getting immersed in science and in experiencing science rather than just trying to put out publications. Also came up in Chanda's earlier, her earlier speeches. So I would highly encourage you to think about, what you're getting out of the REU programs, what you would like to get out of the REU programs, and communicate it to your REU coordinators. And I know that Aaron's a particularly receptive guy, and I'm sure, as not just being at NSF, I'm generally curious about how, what you're getting out of the programs. So if anybody wants to go now, if there's anything in particular that stands out, feel free to share. But also, if you could give your feedback to your REU coordinators, we'd love to hear about it at NSF.
That's great. Yeah, I'm going to suggest that we save, like you say, that we do this on a per REU group basis. Because I just want to see if any of the other panelists want to say any closing remarks. I want to give you a chance to do that, and then we'll all sign off.
I'll just say thanks for the opportunity.
I guess one comment.
Oh.
Go ahead. I can go after.
Yeah, I was just going to say thanks for the opportunity to participate in the panel. It's been a great pleasure, mostly listening to what the other panelists had to say, but happy to chime in a little bit myself as well. I would just like to volunteer that I'm open for questions if people want to message me directly. So just ask Aaron, and he can put you in touch.
Thank you, Ryan. Great having you on the panel.
And same here, Aaron. If there are questions, you can compile them and send them to me, and I'll respond.
Great, I can do that.
I just want to say, first of all, the students, you all asked really excellent questions, and so I appreciate that you all put good thought into your questions and asked good ones. And the other thing that I want to say is, if you had told me when I was an REU student at the University of Chicago in 2000 that I would be doing what I'm doing now, not just in women's studies, but I was also fairly unconvinced that I was, I guess, like smart enough to be a particle physicist. I would not necessarily have believed you. So my point is that if what you would like to do involves creating new pathways, then maybe what you do is create new pathways rather than imagine that it's not possible. And I mean that for everyone. I think for the minoritized students in particular, this is an important message because almost all of you will be barrier breakers, and being a barrier breaker is not always fun and it's not always fair, but it is the way things are right now. But because you have to break the barrier doesn't mean it can't be broken. And I think that that's a really important thing. But I also think for all of the students, you may be envisioning a career that you don't see an example of, and that doesn't mean the career is not possible. So just keep that in mind as you go forward.
Thank you.
I'd like to echo that, and these were all very, very good questions, very well thought out, and I encourage you all to keep thinking about these things. And partly it answers the question I asked, but I'm more interested also in learning about your other experiences in the RU program. And thanks to all the panelists as well. It was great meeting you all virtually.
Yeah, thanks so much for organizing, Aaron. It was really great chatting with you all. I have a blog that I put in the chat, but it's berkeleyjess.blogspot.com, and I write a lot about my transition and advice for interviewing and moving into tech. And Chanda also has a really good blog that everyone should check out as well. So you can get in touch with me via that and via Twitter if you have further questions about data science or tech.
Great. Well, thanks again to all of our panelists and for everyone for joining. Thanks for staying a little bit later than we had anticipated. I think this was a great discussion. And let's leave it there. Bye, everybody.
Thanks. See you.
Thank you.
Thank you.